Today on Built to Last, a returning vet finds his calling.
We're gonna be here, we're gonna work hard.
A building frozen in time.
Before it was thought out, it was a pretty wild place.
And the fight for an 8-hour workday.
It was the labor movement in America that made the difference.
Pick up a hammer. It's time for Built to Last. Built to Last is brought to you by the Chicago Regional Council of Carpenters Labor and Management Committee and Armstrong Ceilings. Faster, easier, better.
Welcome to Built to Last. I'm Monica Peterson.
And I'm Mark Nilsson. America's fortunes were enriched by going west, but for decades, most Chicagoans shuddered to go in that direction.
The West Loop neighborhood of Chicago was in a spiral of ruin until a series of fortunate events led an impoverished urban neighborhood from Skid Row to Restaurant Row.
Food. Now you're talking my language.
What people don't always realize is, when you're standing at Carpenter and Randolph, you're the same distance to the major train stations that you would be in the East Loop. So something that, our fathers and grandfathers and parents did is they got off the trains and they went east. There's no reason that professionals taking the train into the city couldn't get off the train and go west.
This is a super unique site in the city. Many years ago, it used to have a lot of different warehouses. The West Loop has had so much development over the last few years.
CTA expansion, new stops. As it moves forward, I would imagine the Chicago Public Schools will be looking to build new schools there.
It's kind of funny to look back on it today when you have McDonald's moving in, Glassdoor moving in, Uber, GoGo, Twitter. It's really remarkable.
A lot of new restaurants, a lot of new bars. You got the United Center right here, so a lot of living spaces.
There are some people that have lived here for a year and some people that have lived in this neighborhood for 25 years. I personally have lived in this neighborhood for almost 10, and seeing what's happened over these last 10 years has been just incredibly fun.
The West Loop and Fulton Market, as you moved west out of the Central Business District, was definitely a rough neighborhood. Even as recently as 10 years ago or 15 years ago, you might come to dinner before going to a game at the United Center, but you'd be moving pretty quickly. And today, we walk to games from our office.
But 150 years ago, this neighborhood was the stage for an event that would resonate around the world.
This is where it was at, where the markets were, where people were moving meat products and produce and things like that. But also the populations that worked in these industries and worked in the printing industry and whatever else, they had the meeting halls, they had the places where they could gather.
The workday was long and grueling.
People were working 60 hours a week, every week, week in, week out. If people in the workplace were organizing around workplace rights, the employer would bring in strike breakers.
In 1884, the Federation of Organized Trade and Labor Unions set May 1st, 1886, as the deadline by which an 8-hour workday would become standard. By spring 1886, conditions hadn't changed, so collective labor staged a march on May 1st.
The estimates of people that marched that day ranged from 40 to 80,000. The protests continued through the weekend. The next day, a number of workers were on strike at various locations, one of them being the McCormick Reaper Works. When the shift change occurred, there was strike breakers who came and met the picketers outside the gate, and some of the strikers were killed. They decided to have a rally the next day on Sunday.
Held at what had been the Haymarket at Randolph and Des Plaines, the rally was long and mostly uneventful.
Even the mayor at the time, I believe it was Carter Harrison, he eventually left because he didn't see the rally as turning into something that was going to get out of control that he needed to be there to monitor.
Around 10:30 that night, police came to disperse the crowds, and then things got violent. Gunshots were fired and police claimed that there had been a bomb.
No one's been able to establish a bomb or who made the bomb. But what they did is they took leaders from the movement, and they put them on trial. People who were organizers, who were writers, and they brought them in. There was 8 of them. They sentenced 5 of them to death and 3 of them to life sentences, and 4 of them ended up being hung.
The trial and verdicts were controversial and condemned internationally. And on June 26, 1893, Illinois Governor John Peter Altgeld pardoned the surviving 3 defendants.
International Labor Day is May 1st all over the world. And even though this isn't our recognized Labor Day in the United States, trade unionists come from all over the globe here in Chicago to pay honor to the Haymarket martyrs in Haymarket Square.
But at the turn of the century, very little had changed in the neighborhood.
This was a place where already butchered meat would come to get basically refined, cut into smaller pieces, and then sold to restaurants or grocers. By the 30s, it was known as the 2nd largest poultry market in the world.
With the 1930s came the Great Depression, and the West Loop became home for thousands of unemployed workers, mostly single men, and was dubbed the city's Skid Row.
Looking at classical works of Chicago literature by Willard Motley and Nelson Algren, a lot of the street life that they talk about is what we typically call Skid Row, which was in that area along Madison and Monroe in the West Loop.
It was very deserted all the time, and there was always people who was down on their luck. There were a lot of flop houses, you would call, where people who had drinking problems or drug problems would lay their head down for a while and or go to the soup kitchens and get something to eat. And of course, you know, what comes with that is a lot of other crime and prostitution and a lot of other things.
With the end of World War II, the neighborhood didn't share in the post-war prosperity. Isolated west of the Loop, the Chicago Stadium had been home to the Chicago Blackhawks and Bulls.
And the Chicago Stadium was always seen as ripe for development.
And in 1984, the Bulls drafted a young rookie from North Carolina.
So you have kind of the perfect storm.
One of my mentors is a gentleman by the name of George Dunn. He was actually 42nd Ward Democratic Committeeman and president of the county board. And when they changed the ward maps, I told Mr. Dunn, they gave us another ward that has a lot of potential. There's a lot of vacant land, but there's a lot of potential.
You walk through some pretty scary buildings. This was about the scariest I've been in personally.
It was a pretty wild place.
At Armstrong Ceiling and Wall Solutions, we take great pride in making a positive difference in the lives of people. With the broadest portfolio in the industry and the technical performance to back it up, you can design and install with confidence. Our ceiling construction expertise, training, and pre-engineered ceiling solutions make it easy for you to seamlessly transition from one end of the building to the other. Improve construction efficiencies and keep every job on time, on budget, and on the mark with Armstrong Ceiling and Wall Solutions. Faster, easier, better.
Keeping restaurants and hotels up to date with the latest design trends is a constant challenge. Finding qualified contractors isn't at finishingchicago.com. We work with top designers and general contractors who use the latest painting, drywall finishing, and wall covering techniques in Chicagoland's premier hotels and restaurants. The hospitality industry relies on finishingchicago.com as its free resource to find quality finishing contractors. For a great finish, start with finishingchicago.com.
Welcome back to Built to Last. From Google to McDonald's, the West Loop is welcoming in a host of new neighbors.
Oprah was the real pioneer coming into this neighborhood in the early 90s.
She built one of the newest buildings in this community when people hadn't built anything in this neighborhood in years. The great restaurant we have, Wishbone, Palace Grill. I mean, these fruit restaurants that's been around for a while, they made their whole career off of Harpo Studios.
People started wanting to go to the Bulls game, and to get to the Bulls game after work from downtown, you'd run down Randolph. The types of restaurants that were opening up in the West Loop weren't hot dog stands and corner delis and diners. They were fancy restaurants. They were high-end restaurants. They weren't complete white tablecloth restaurants, but they were among that new type of dining that particularly Chicagoans wanted to do. A place that could go out, have a very nice meal, spend a few bucks, but can still be casual.
This area really developed, I think, in building up to and in the wake of the Democratic National Convention of 1996.
Buildings were torn down, lots was fixed up, streets were done. We fixed up the expressway. They got red, white, and blue flag railings on the entrance and exit. Planters were put in, and the area was looking nice for the whole world to see.
Old warehouses were turned into loft condos, and new buildings were even being built. Neighborhoods around downtown immediately that were once rough neighborhoods that you wouldn't want to ever go into, like the West Loop, were now nicer neighborhoods, safer neighborhoods. People were willing to take a chance and move in and live there.
There were also other improvements made in the West Loop, like the first L stop to be built in the last 20 years at Morgan and Lake.
With the emergence and evolution of the millennial characteristic of living, which is riding bikes and taking public transportation, the L stop just fell right in place.
After the resident base moved in, then it became an area for commerce to move in.
We looked at Fulton Cold Storage Building, and it's the largest building in the neighborhood. So why not start there? Once we had a sense that we were going to land Google as a tenant, we actually went out then and bought as many buildings and pieces of land that we could in the neighborhood.
Fulton West is a campus of office buildings at Fulton and Elizabeth. It was bought by a developer and a dot-com company. Unfortunately, that company went bankrupt in the dot-com bubble, and the concrete structure that was built had been built up to the 4th floor, and they ran out of money. And this site sat abandoned for 15 years.
When we moved into Fulton Market, we knew we were going to be here for a while. We wanted to be a respectful neighbor. There are people that have been here before us, retailers, residents, other businesses.
Making sure the design and the aesthetic of this building fit into the fabric of this neighborhood was incredibly important to our team. How can we build a building that's going to create the space that we need for the office tenant to want to be here, but that doesn't look out of place and that actually fits right in?
But in the end of the day, a successful project for us is a positive for the rest of the constituents of the neighborhood.
The biggest challenge up front was going into a building that was 16 years old and working with all of the constraints and parameters that were already built without completely redoing anything. We can't do it without the skilled union laborers. There's just a particular level of expertise and ability to do the job right, get it done on time, and within budget. There's only one way to do it.
We go on to jobs before they even come out of the ground or get rehabbed and talk to the developers and generals and tell them that our members and our contractors can do the work and get it done for them.
I would say 99% of the developments that happened in our area is union, right? Union contractors. Then we also been blessed that we have so much going on and so many cranes happening that they're beginning to get a shortage of people. So that opens up doors for everyone else.
And it's apropos that alongside the growing corporate presence, this neighborhood is home to numerous union headquarters.
My great-grandfather, Michael Sexton, was president of the Chicago District Council of Carpenters in the 1940s. We're here to stand up for people that are in the union or not in the union to help them better their lives.
It was the labor movement in America that made the difference. They stood up and fought for their workers who were in the labor unions, but the benefits that they won were enjoyed by everyone.
The Haymarket still can be used as an example today for 8-hour workday for union members still have a fight on their hands, whether it was in the 1930s, 1970s, or today in 2017.
The millennials aren't all rich. You know, I talk to the young folks over at Google. They say, hey, I got student debt. I got an entry-level job.
You look at the minimum wage, right now it's $7.50 an hour. And if you look at it, $7.50 an hour, 40 hours a week gets you a little less than $300 per week. Assuming you get 40 hours, that's less than $15,000 a year before taxes.
You have a lot of the working poor living there and a lot of single people. As we continue on this course, we're trying to balance things out.
And balance means retaining affordable housing.
So you get those folks who work in the area opportunity to move into a place and still be close to where they work.
In the end, it's a recipe for community.
Generally, a restaurant opens in a neighborhood, and it becomes a neighborhood restaurant, and if it melds in with the neighborhood, it's a success. In the West Loop, things are different. First, the restaurants were there, then the residents came in, and now these restaurants that were once destination restaurants have become neighborhood restaurants.
To live in the neighborhood is a lot of fun. We have a ton of things going on and have for a long time. We've got, the Blackhawks have been winning Stanley Cups left and right.
It's one of the few 24/7 neighborhoods in the city. It has retail, it has hotels, it has restaurants, it has entertainment.
This area reminds me of an area that can take, dirt and turn it into a diamond.
In 2017, Chicago's West Loop neighborhood has nearly 50 active construction sites, including the global headquarters for McDonald's.
What was once one of the city's coldest buildings is now home to one of its hottest companies.
The cold storage building is such a large building and such a presence in the neighborhood at 10 stories with nothing else around it, virtually frozen solid. Developers had looked at it for years to try and do residential conversions, hotel conversions, and our partners looked at it and determined it could be a great opportunity for large users. It had large floor plates, great opportunity for signage in the neighborhood, and the views of downtown, of the Central Business District, the Loop, are remarkable. A view that not a lot of office tenants really get from the west side.
The company I work for, Amos Mechanical, was hired to decommission the refrigeration system. There's a central system that kept the entire building cold. I'm a mechanical contractor, by trade, so it enables me access to industrial areas. So I get to go places that perhaps other people may not have clear access to. And I went there one night after work and shot some photos, and didn't really like the results. Plus I was cold. I didn't realize the building was a freezer. I had just recently shot some photos in the wintertime at Yellowstone. So I used that experience. I put on my boots, all my multiple layers, and I went back the following Saturday and spent about 5 hours in the ice box.
In the business of converting old warehouses into office or residential, you walk through some pretty scary buildings. This was about the scariest I've been in personally.
Cold storage building on Fulton before it was thought out was a pretty wild place.
It was magical. It was overwhelming. At the time, I was more interested to explore than I was actually to photograph. There was so much from stalactites and stalagmites and hoar ice and all different types of frost and columns of snow and ice from the ceiling to the floor.
What's really unique about this building is it was built in two separate structures. There's a superstructure and then a separate exterior structure that was tied back into the concrete superstructure. And the gap in between, which at times was about a foot, was filled in with cork for the refrigeration. As we walked through and did tours, there were certain floors, certain quadrants that we couldn't even get into. They were frozen solid. We tried to get a door open with a forklift and we weren't able to.
I was working probably on the 6th or 7th, 8th floor where the doors had been shut for many years and where this ice had formed. Down the first floor, I remember there was a bobcat. They were doing construction, they were cleaning up. Every time that bobcat dropped its load down the first floor, you had a little creak over your head. The ceiling was actually coming down from the upper elevation, coming down towards the floor, but then there were areas where the floor was raised up, meeting up to the ceiling. So areas where I had to duck and crawl, other areas were more open. If you weren't careful, some of the ice was hanging down from the ceiling. If you walked, it would fall and fall down the back of your neck.
So how do you turn an indoor Siberia into a corporate headquarters?
When we were looking to thaw the building, we weren't sure what was going to happen to that exterior structure. There were even places in the building where the exterior tiebacks were severed. So we were very careful and strategic about how we thought it. Originally, we poked some large holes in the middle of October into the building to see how the structure would react to thawing. Once we realized that the exterior structure wasn't going to be a hazard outside of the building, we ended up bringing propane heaters in to speed up the process. One thing that's pretty interesting is this building over about 100 years didn't go through Chicago's freeze and thaw every season. So it was frozen much of the time, and the concrete was actually in much better shape than we anticipated.
It held up pretty good, and when they thawed it out, they busted out all the exterior walls.
We did everything we could to retain the original facade. Unfortunately, in certain places, it was just in such bad condition that we weren't able to. So we stripped the entire building down to the superstructure and rebuilt the facade and the window system around the 10-story building.
You know, the building, if you look at what it was, and then I came back and I viewed it from a distance when it was just a skeleton, the shell of the building that was left. And now when you drive by and you look at it, you see this change. It was in flux from an industrial standpoint, and now you look at it, it's just became a piece of art.
And I was in the turret of our Humvee, and we were just driving along like any other day, and then before you know it, boom, there's a big explosion.
Stubila, for over 125 years, has led the industry in measuring and leveling. Still manufactured in Germany since 1865, tradesmen rely on Stubila every day for its precision and durability. We continue to revolutionize the way we build with our lasers, levels, and laser distance measuring tools on commercial and residential job sites around the world. Stubila, how true pros measure.
Meet the new family of Blaze laser measures from Bosch. Go ahead, turn it on and start measuring. It's that simple. The Blaze family offers a wide range of functions to tackle any measuring job. Extend your reach with accuracy up to 1/16 of an inch. With Bluetooth-enabled devices, easily transfer measurements to your smartphone or tablet with free Bosch apps. Reach farther, work faster, and stay accurate with the Bosch Blaze family of laser measures. Measure on.
Now, Rob North brings us a story about the Carpenters' continued commitment to serve those who have served our country.
Thank you, guys. The trades and the Carpenters Union always support and welcome our vets when they return from war. Our next story explores what happens when a carpenter goes off to war.
My father's name is Francisco Salgado. My dad actually moved to the United States when he was 18, met my mom. I'm the oldest of 5. We kind of had a modest upbringing, but they always took care of us. We had what we needed anyway. My dad had a real sense of pride. He had a pride in country. He was from Mexico, and he also was real proud to live in America and the opportunities that he got. He always told me, you know, hard work is what's going to get you where you need to be, right?
But after high school, Frank needed direction.
I didn't have plans for what I was going to do in the future. So I tried the junior college down the street. I basically made a little pact with myself saying I was going to give myself 2 years. If I didn't figure it out, I was going to sign up for the military.
He paid his way waiting tables, where he met the woman who would become his wife.
I definitely knew that I was in love right off the bat, right? It was kind of corny. The way we got along, she was just my favorite person, my best friend still to this day. I got to meet her family. They, I think, could tell that I was somebody that she was interested in as well. Her father is a retired contractor and union carpenter, right? So he just saw that opportunity. He kind of knew I was in pretty good shape. You know, I was in the military. It was right after basic training. So he said, why don't you give this a try?
Frank was in the 4th year of his apprenticeship when his National Guard unit was called up.
We were deployed to Baghdad, and I was the only carpenter in my unit. That was kind of neat because occasionally they need a door hung or they need something built, shelves, something like that. So I would be the go-to guy. Well, I was able to build these lofts to give us more room. So our room was the room to hang out in. Everybody played cards in our room and stuff like that. So we would go out and do patrols for 14 to 18 hours, and 80% of the time nothing happened. We were just kind of hanging out. We're out on a normal patrol just like any other day, and I was in the turret of our Humvee, and we were just driving along like any other day, and then before you know it, boom, there's a big explosion. You know, at the time, it's you almost don't have time to be scared or anything, but there's the explosion, there's dust everywhere, you can't see anything. A friend of mine, he noticed that I was bleeding, you know, and I didn't know it at the time, but I took some shrapnel to my arm. So my squad leader has me get down. I went to see the medic, and they bandaged me up. But I mean, really, you don't have time to be scared when it comes to that, to be honest. It's almost scarier watching one of your buddies when their truck gets blown up, because it doesn't look like anyone could survive that.
Frank didn't sustain long-term damage from the shrapnel in his arm. He was awarded the Purple Heart, and after completing his deployment, he returned home to the woman who captured his heart. Frank took up the tools of his trade once more, and his excellence in the field led him back to where it all began.
If you had asked me during the apprentice program if I was ever going to be an instructor, I would have thought it was crazy. My military background plays a whole lot in the way I instruct my students, right? So I impress upon them day one, we're going to work hard.
Being in Mr. Sargao's class, with him being a vet, he wants you to be able to say, I'm in the world and there's things that you're supposed to do. And if you're not going to sit here and be on time, if you're not going to play by the rules, then there's no reason to do it.
As far as work ethic too, where if I got to get something done, I got to get it done now.
He's always trying to help us, asking us if we understand things, if things make more sense.
It's good when you see a student like catch on. That's where you get a sense of pride.
I can't put this 18-foot stringer up here by myself. I'm going to need somebody to help me.
In the military, to get a job done, you all got to work together, and I can't necessarily do what I do unless you're doing what you do.
So not depending on them, they're depending on me, we get the job done.
So that brotherhood we get here as union carpenters, we got to have each other's back in order for our union to go forward. I have a 5- and a 7-year-old boy, and it's definitely something where they'll see me doing work, or they know the work that I do, and as they get older, it's something I'm going to try to give them some of that knowledge, but some of that work ethic and that sense of pride they could get from a good day's work, just like that, just like my dad showed me.
My career as a carpenter has been enriched by my years of service in the Corps. Frank Salgado and exemplary instructors like him are always utilizing their unique experiences to build better tradespeople for the future.
That's all for this episode of Built to Last.
And remember, woodworking minus patience equals kindling.
We'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.
To the fire.